Nothing in the news, I think, attracts people's attention more than the idea that there was a flood, a worldwide flood. You hear it ridiculed over and over again, and the ages of the fossils and so forth are in the millions and the hundreds of millions and the billions of years. You read it in the newspapers, magazines, it just goes on and on and on. Well, David and I have a different view because we've been out there to the field, we've seen the evidence. Other people have seen the evidence, but they're using a different set of assumptions to interpret the evidence in the earth. This afternoon, we're going to see a different set, not only of the evidence itself, but a different set of assumptions. And why the assumptions? The underlying framework of what we're saying is going to be exactly what we believe corresponds to the biblical record of creation. What was in the earth at one time, David?
Let's look at Genesis 6:4. This is one subject that sort of fascinates people because we're told in Genesis 6:4 that there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. There's a couple of instances in the Bible actually that talk about giants. Of course, when the ancient Israel was in battle, doing battle with the Philistines, there were still some people in existence that were giants. Goliath, of course, being one of them. So the effects of sin, of course, tended to decrease man's height after the fall of Adam and Eve. But originally, of course, and especially before the flood, humans were much taller, larger, and arguably much more intelligent than we are today. But if you look at the fossil record, you find very little evidence of giants, ancient giants, or human giants. In fact, so little evidence that people say giants never existed. And if giants existed, where's the evidence? So we'd like to bring this to your attention, actually. An article that we found in Life magazine, October 7, 1946, volume 21, number 15, page 27, for those of you who are interested in looking it up yourself.
And there's another one, David.
March 21, 1949.
The new giant appears on man's family tree.
And it's interesting that Life magazine actually publishes pictures of the fossil remains of these giant bones that are human-like bones that were found. And the way they actually interpreted these was perhaps they were some kind of ancient relative of the earliest primates. But it's clear in many instances that what they found were actually of human origin, not of primate origin.
David, look at this. Tell us about this picture, your position. Tell us about what this is all about, what they're picturing here.
Well, here you see, it says there's a jaw of a young Prometheus, quote, ape man at the time of his death. And it shows here that there was a fracture here. It's hard to see, it's hard to guess exactly what happened to this individual, whether this fracture, how this fracture might have occurred, or whether it was part of, happened after death or whatever. But there was actually evidence that this jaw belonged to more of a human than an ape. But of course, in the evolutionary scheme of things, there's no such thing as giant humans, because that's the absolute reverse of what you would think would be happening in evolution. The discovery of giant humans in the evolutionary tree would, of course, turn upside down the theory of evolution, because we're supposed to be getting more and more sophisticated, not degenerating.
David, this next picture, maybe that enlightens us a little bit more.
Yeah, you can see the size of the normal human mandible here on your left, and then the comparison of that same area in the jaw of the on the right. It's basically, you can see the jaw on the right has teeth much, much larger than is found in the current humans.
Why don't we take a look at the picture right here? Von Koenigswald, tell us, as he is looking at it, what this is all about. Now, this is all taken from sketches from the Life magazine articles that we referred to. These are sketches, not the originals, because, of course, that's copyrighted. Give us an idea, David, as you look at this picture and the man, von Koenigswald, holding this fragment with the jawbone, the teeth. What does it actually say about whether this is a man or an ape or whatever?
Well, look at the scientific name that they've ascribed to this piece of jawbone that they found. Everybody's familiar with the term mega, right? If you have mega anything, that's a lot, right? So meganthropus is a large version of a gigantic man who supposedly lived in Java between 450,000 and 550,000 years ago, according to the evolutionary time frame. But we would like to submit that this tiny fragment of giant human remains is actually one of the antediluvians that existed prior to the flood. The antediluvians, of course, being giant people. And that, of course, does fit with what the Bible states, that there were giants in the earth in those days.
Here's another picture of the comparison between two teeth. Tell us about that.
You can see the size difference of the two teeth, the molars. In this case, they called this molar the great molar of Gigantopithecus. Gigantopithecus, compared with the molar of a modern man. So you can see that the size difference there of these teeth. And don't let these drawings fool you. If you want to see the original photographs of the teeth themselves, Life magazine did not publish these drawings. They published pictures. But we didn't show the pictures due to other issues. But these are drawings of the pictures themselves. And so if you have a lot of interest in this, then the evidence is there to investigate.
And wait a minute, let me ask you, you can actually go and order copies of these Life magazines and see the pictures for yourselves.
You can, until the antique dealers are exhausted of their supply of this magazine. It turns out that you can order most old magazines from antique magazine dealers for a fairly reasonable price, which is how we got these. We actually ordered these magazines that you can get old issues of just about any magazine, actually, if you pay enough money for them.
Now we want to turn to the conception given there in Life magazine. And again, this is taken from Life magazine. What do we have, David? What are the artist's conceptions?
This is, of course, the argument that we've had all along, that you go from a tooth to a drawing and see what happens. You see? You go from a tooth to a drawing. And that drawing there, of course, on the left is what they believe that Gigantopithecus looked like. Now, they don't really know that that's what he looked like. They just want to believe that that's what he looked like. Because in any other scenario, how in the world could you have a modern-looking human that is a giant? It doesn't make any sense. So they had to put him in the framework of the evolutionary time scale and what they feel like that man looked like 450,000, 550,000 years ago. And of course, you see the poor individual there to his right doesn't really look a lot better. Anyway, I think we get the idea.
Well, David, about the time frame, 450,000, 550,000 years, that's all based, on radioactivity. We've already gone through that and shown that indeed the whole principle of the constant radioactive decay is shot to pieces. It's always been a fallacious assumption. It's amazing how many wrong conclusions you can come to if you use the wrong assumption to begin with. There are many ways, of course, we can come from Knoxville, Tennessee, down here to Chattanooga. And I could have gone off in 4 or 5 or 8 or 10 or 20 directions and went 120 miles, and I would have missed Chattanooga unless I had the right directions. So unless you have the right assumptions, the fundamental assumptions correct, as David has just said, they take a tooth and they're going to make that tooth into something that looked like something that came along the evolutionary tree. Well, let's look at this next slide, David, especially. You've talked about this before as we talked about it in other presentations.
Yeah, so they actually drew life-scale sizes of Gigantopithecus.
We want to emphasize that we didn't do this. This is appearing in Life magazine.
Right.
This is simply a sketch of what's in Life magazine.
So you can see the size difference of Gigantopithecus there. I mean, you can see that they've drawn him to scale compared to the modern man, at least maybe comparatively speaking 8 feet tall or so, it looks like from that picture there. But we're not going to be surprised actually if the antediluvians were at least 10 feet tall or taller than modern man. I mean, not 10 feet taller, but 10 feet tall total, or who knows how tall actually, but at least that. So I think it's interesting to note that you can no longer really say that no evidence has been found that there were giants that used to live. The question is that what meaning has been ascribed to the few fossil remains that have been found that theoretically could be ascribed to human giants. And that is the more important question, I think, that needs to be looked at.
David, as we're looking at this, just a couple of slides ago, we saw that the scientist himself on Koningswald said, here we have basically the remains, the 2 jawbones and so forth, modern versus the very large one. He said this is from a gigantic man. Now, as we look at this particular picture here, we have modern man. That's the only place we see the man. But now they're going to say Schwarzkopf's ape man, Prometheus ape, proconsul ape. In other words, now we have the framework of evolution being impressed upon the actual data, in spite of the fact that von Koningswald, the scientist, didn't say that at all. These were the editors of Life magazine making up stories. So we have to understand that not everything you can read in the newspaper, magazines, television, telling you about the ancient ages of fossils and everything, it all depends upon the fact, it all relates to the fact they're using erroneous assumptions and erroneous framework to interpret the actual results. David and I have been involved for a number of years, of course, with respect to many things concerning the flood. Now, today I had to make a decision. Do I get actual still pictures and bring them to you and discuss that? That would have taken a long time for us to give you the proper background of the actual evidence. Instead, we've gone ahead and we picked out clips from the DVD, The Young Age of the Earth. And that's what, if this program goes the way it should go, that's what we're going to be starting to see right now.
Catherine Hill Bay, Australia. Not far from this coastal area near Flat Rocks Point is an object of extreme geological interest, an ancient tree. The fossilized remains of this tree can be seen extending through over 12 feet of sedimentary layers between 2 coal seams located here. Years ago, when a mining company excavated the layers exposing the tree, the bottom of the tree could be seen extending down to the lower coal seam. Since that time, the lower part of the tree has broken off. Even now, in its reduced length, the tree extends through layers geologists normally theorize to have taken hundreds of thousands of years to accumulate. But these layers could not have taken long ages to accumulate because the tree would have rotted long before the sediments would have had time to accumulate around it. Rather, this tree is mute testimony to its catastrophic burial by at least 2 sequences of volcanic ash deposits. As the evidence indicates, The tree was probably buried in a series of closely spaced volcanic ash flows, perhaps similar to the catastrophic burial of thousands of trees at Mount St. Helens in Washington State.
Let's stop there just for a moment and go back and get the background as to where all of this came from. Catherine Hill Bay there in Australia. I had a very, very good friend who was a geologist over there in Australia. He knew that we were in the process of doing the taping, of course, for evidence of a young age of the Earth. And so what you just saw was indeed, as it said, a tree that extended from several different formations geologically at the bottom through other geological formations near the top. And indeed, the essence of it is, geologically, the geologists say that the ones at the bottom, are very, very old. The ones at the top are much, much younger. So you've got then, what? Millions of years, supposedly, separating those layers from the bottom to the top. And the idea is very, very simple. How in the world can you get this tree extending from layers that are several million years old to several less than several million years old to basically hundreds of thousands of years old and so forth, without the tree disintegrating? And of course, common sense tells you that cannot be the case. Something had to happen for the tree to be implanted and for volcanic eruptions, we believe, at the time of the flood, to cover the area of that tree over and over and over again, and to sort of blanket the tree from the bottom to the top, but over a very, very short period of time. We're going to talk about the volcanism that basically accompanied the worldwide flood here in just a few minutes. But anyway, this particular aspect of trees, and this is not the only time. There are trees like this that have been found in other parts of the world as well, but we were not able to actually get the documentation in time to get it into this particular DVD. But as we continue now, we're going to go to another...
So let's take a closer look at the evidence for coal formation as it occurs in the spectacular Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana. The Amex Eagle Butte open pit mine near Gillette, Wyoming, exposes the vast coal reserves made visible by the strip mining methods used here. The Eagle Butte mine boasts of coal layers or seams with thicknesses ranging up to 120 feet. Eagle Butte mine is part of a much larger coal-rich area known as the Powder River Basin. This gigantic 10,000 square mile reserve, situated between the Black Hills of South Dakota on the east and the Bighorn Mountains on the west, extends northward to the Yellowstone River in Montana and southward to Casper, Wyoming. The immensity of the Powder River Basin coal deposits has attracted the attention of geologists for decades. Such interest was documented in the May 1993 issue of Earth magazine. The article, Powder River Coal, Geologic Enigma, Environmental Dilemma, included these statements. Powder River's coal seams run remarkably thick and unsullied by other material. Usually, unwanted sediment such as clay washes over a deposit before coal seams can get very thick. But Powder River coal is packed in immense strips, some more than 200 feet thick. These seams stretch vast distances up and down the basin. They're hundreds of miles long. They're 50 miles wide, says James McClurg, a geologist at the University of Wyoming. They're not little pods of an acre or two. They're immense things. McClurg, who studied the basin for more than a decade, says no other place in the world has as many seams 50 feet or more thick. But the Powder River Basin is not only an economic resource. To geologists, it's also an intriguing scientific enigma. Geologists have been studying the basin for more than a century, largely to answer a baffling question. How did the seams get so massive? Or more precisely, why weren't the seams diluted by influxes of clay and other impurities before they thickened? As McClurg puts it, how on earth did things remain constant enough so that you can get 200 feet of coal? The genesis of any kind of coal demands a precise sequence of events, however. If you don't get all of them, you don't get coal, explains McClurg. And to get seams more than 200 feet thick, low in impurities and low in sulfur is a remarkable achievement. He adds, it would be like blindfolding yourself, spinning around and hitting the center of a dartboard 100 times in a row.
David, let's talk about this for a moment. 200 feet thick, 20-story building, coal, stretching 20, 30, 40, 50 miles, 10 miles in the other direction, unsullied by clay and other impurities. And they've been studying it. It said that the geologists have been studying the Powder River coal for over a century. Now, you just saw, of course, the reference was to the May 1993 issue of Earth magazine. David and I saw the magazine, and we looked at it and we said, this has got to be, we've got to some way, somehow, get a record of this, because these were just pictures, of course, in Earth magazine. So we decided to actually call the owners of the mine, the MX mine. And as I went up the ladder to try to get close to the president, because most people wouldn't listen to me when I said that we want the actual footage, we want to go and we want to videotape the Powder River coal area because it's so extraordinary and it's written up in Earth magazine. Turns out that indeed the owners, president, vice president, board, chairman, and so forth, they didn't know anything about the article there in Earth magazine. They said, we've got to investigate this before we tell you anything. They went out and investigated, called us back. David, do you remember the tremendous surprise? Actually, God's providence was at work. Because they said, when they called us back, they said, we've taken a look at this information in this magazine. We're owners, you know, but we didn't understand the significance of just how large this was, 20 stories high of coal. We're going to go out, and I had mentioned to them, you know, that David and I wanted to go out. We wanted to rent a helicopter with a first-class camera crew to videotape everything. They said, we're going to do exactly as you suggested, except we're going to pay for the helicopter. We're going to go out. We're going to do the videotaping. I said, well, any chance that we could get a copy? They said, we are not only going to do it free of charge, we're going to give you the actual footage to put in this DVD that you're doing.
Well, at that time it was a video. DVD
right.
had not yet been invented.
That's right. But the question is, David, do you and I both not know that that was an answer to prayer at that particular point, because that's when we were in the process of putting together the script for the young age of the earth, and the God of heaven smiled on what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars it took for them to do it, but they did it quickly, enough for us to actually get it into the actual video, video itself.
Huh.
Also, you understand that indeed, when the geologists look at this, they said, you know, we're amazed, we don't understand. A whole century we've been thinking about this. David, why don't you think, considering the fact that they don't have any answer, here's something about the flood they don't have any answer for, just like the polonium halos and the granites. What would prevent all these geologists, thousands and thousands of them over a century have looked at this? David, can you understand why they did not recognize this could not have been the result of, you know, hundreds of millions of years of coal formation or whatever? Why wouldn't they think of the flood?
Well, I think that what we're trying to get across in the video, Young Age of the Earth, is to show evidence that there is things, even here within the United States, that points almost irrefutably to the existence of a worldwide flood. And we didn't just show footage from Powder River Basin, which in and of itself has these coal seams, 200 feet thick, and it said that some of them are hundreds of miles long, 50 miles wide. All of this fits very nicely and fits perfectly with the biblical record of the flood, when you had massive amounts of vegetation that were swept up by the flood waters and deposited, and sediments deposited on top of those. They were compressed. All of the conditions were perfect for coal formation. In other parts of the world, the same sediments were picked up, redeposited, buried, in conditions that were favorable to oil formation. Of course, where did that happen? That happened predominantly in the Middle East. There are tremendous stores and reservoirs of oil in the Middle East, and also in Alaska. And as we just found out, there's huge stores even off the shore of the United States in the Gulf of Mexico. But to me, all of these evidences that we see, the coal seams, the oil reserves, all of that point to a world which was vastly different at one time than what we have now. In that world, there was tremendous amounts of lush vegetation that was swept up by the floodwaters, deposited in conditions that were favorable to the formation of coal. And the reason why that coal is so pure is because if you have everything being piled up in one event and laid down in one huge stack, that's going to give a very, very pure mixture, or a very pure starting material for the coal itself. That's why in the evolutionary thinking, with a little layer of plant material being laid down and then another 100 years later another layer being laid down, how can you have all that happening year after year without any kind of contaminants being placed in between, such as clay, such as the other impurities, which McClurg said he didn't see anywhere in this Powder River coal basin. What he doesn't mention is the fact that this all fits very nicely with the flood story in the Bible. But that's not the only thing that we saw and that we documented in the video, Young Age of the Earth, that confirms, gives strong evidence to the story of the flood in the Bible. We're going to look at some other things as well.
Let's do that.
Scientists at Argonne National Laboratory have answered this question in a series of experiments performed in the 1980s. One of the earliest reports about their work appeared in the magazine Chemical and Engineering News in the November 21, 1983 issue. On page 42 of this issue, we read the following quote: "Chemists at Argonne National Laboratory have succeeded in making a type of artificial coal from naturally occurring materials. The process is much less severe than formerly thought to be necessary and provides some new insights into coal structure and how to alter it." Later, after their published reports appeared in the science journal Organic Geochemistry, the British science journal Nature reported on the success of their experiments. On page 316 of the journal Nature, March 28, 1985, we read the following: "Winans and his colleagues at Argonne National Laboratory have taken less than 1 year to prepare a thoroughly characterized synthetic coal. The material they produce is indistinguishable from the real thing by all the techniques so far applied to it, and its synthesis raises many interesting questions in coal chemistry." To understand their results, let's first note the basic structure of wood. Two major wood components are cellulose and lignin. The lignin basically acts as a binding agent for the cellulose fibers. Several variations of the argon experiment were run, but the successful formula combined lignin and clay with heat, about 150 degrees Celsius, in the absence of oxygen. Over a period of about 8 months, artificial coal was produced. The rapidity with which coal can form when steam interacts with wood under pressure leads us to ask, can steam or hot water also produce the rapid transformation of organic matter to oil? An article, Water, Water Everywhere, published in the February 20, 1993 issue of Science News, answers this question. Researchers at Exxon discovered water acted an essential part in the formation of oil. Efforts to synthesize oil met with failure until very hot water was added to the reactor vessel containing the source rock sample. When this was done, a layer of oil was found on top of the water at the end of the experiment. This result proves there is an alternate path to the production of oil in the earth, with superheated water playing a major role. The article indicated this discovery could wreak havoc with established ideas about oil formation. Actually, however,
Other natural events are already wreaking havoc with conventional theories. Incredibly enough, certain researchers, one at Oregon State University, have published reports showing evidence of present-day oil formation in the Guaymas Basin in the Gulf of California. Right now, in the Gulf of California, below 6,000 feet of water, is an accumulation of organic sediments derived from marine algae and other organic sources. Below this, superheated water is being pushed up by a deep heat source through these sediments. Oil is being formed in the interaction of organic sediments with superheated water. This hydrothermal oil from the Guaymas Basin is virtually indistinguishable from crude oils obtained from wells drilled in the earth. The implications of this discovery can hardly be overestimated. The possibility must be entertained that the genesis of the reservoir crude oils abundant throughout the world may be explained by hydrothermal processes similar to what's happening in the Guaymas Basin. But instead of an open dispersion of oil directly into the seawater, a closed system could easily be visualized where a reservoir of crude could be collected. It is conceivable that a worldwide flood was instrumental in the production of the tremendous oil reserves of the Middle East and elsewhere. The vast amounts of vegetation buried by such a flood, mixed with superheated water similar to that detected in the Guaymas Basin, could produce oil in the volumes we see today. Depending on the burial conditions, the organic matter would be transformed to either oil or coal. Is there a model of Earth history incorporating these features? One which allows the formation of the world's large oil and coal reserves over a much shorter time than has been previously thought possible?
Well, yes, David and I believe indeed it is the flood model, for sure. As David has already pointed out, the flood water is rising, the vast covered canopy of grass and plants and trees all being uprooted and matted together, especially there in the area of the Powder River coal and other places buried under large amounts of sediment. The pressure, the heat, changing a lot of it, of course, into the oil that we see today, and of course in other places, coal. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, but David, isn't it extraordinary that this came out in Nature magazine, Chemical and Engineering News, over 15 years ago, and that in the scientific literature of today, you still read reports of geologists saying, well, you know, oil has got to form, you know, hundreds of millions of years ago or millions and millions of years ago. Coal is going to take millions and millions of years to form. But it isn't true. What you will see if you actually watch the DVD, and you can just go to our website, halos.com. You don't have to buy the DVD if you don't want to. The DVD, Young Age of the Earth, is there. You will see that David and I went into the laboratory. And David, you want to describe briefly what we did with some wood and water and a little furnace?
Yeah, you'll see it in the next clip, I think, where we actually take a little piece of wood, we put it in a container and heat it up to a very high temperature. We seal it in this metal capsule and clamp it down really tight. And then what we actually do in the video is show what happens, or show the condition of this wood sample after it has been baked in this oven for several weeks. And the process of coalification has actually started, as you'll be able to notice here in the video. But it's kind of interesting, just notice when we're opening, when we were shooting the video, we actually had 4 or 5 of these containers that we had used to put the sample of wood in, and then to bake it, and then open it on camera. So we had opened, I think, 2 or 3 of these canisters, these metal canisters, and then we opened the one that actually made it into the video. When we opened that one, it started fizzing, and the water started bubbling, and As soon as that happened, everybody got real excited, and they were trying to, move the camera to capture what was happening, because apparently we had gotten a very good seal on that particular sample, so that the process of coalification was advanced even more efficiently in that particular sample than the other ones, just due to the way that the container was sealed weeks earlier. But I think you'll be able to see that when...
Well, David, unfortunately, because of the time constraints of our program
that
today, I did not get that particular segment in. But anyway, what he has described is very, very accurate. We took just a little piece of wood, put it into a steel pipe, put a little bit of water in it, and sealed it up tightly with Teflon, and put it into a furnace just at 150 degrees centigrade. Not that great. And left it in for just a couple of weeks, and then you will actually see, when you see the DVD, you will see us unscrewing the cap, and you will see the fizz, the gas that was produced with the interaction of the water with the wood. And you'll see this piece of black wood come out on the way to being formed to coal in a few weeks. And then, as David just read, you heard him read, the fact that indeed a few more months, and indeed you actually come out with something that is coal. And then there in the Guaymas Basin, you see the oil being formed at the present time. Again, almost unambiguous evidence that exactly what the Bible says about the rapidity and the effects of the flood are there. Our view is that God so ordered these things to happen so that here in these days in which we live, anyone who really wants to know the truth about the Bible record of creation and the flood can see that these are unequivocal evidences that can only be explained by the action of the flood. Well, let's go on.
The likelihood of extensive volcanic activity during the biblical flood leads us to consider one of the most famous volcanic eruptions in modern time. On May 18, 1980, a giant landslide on the north face of Mount St. Helens in Washington State accompanied an explosion equivalent to 20 million tons of TNT. This lateral blast of superheated steam, volcanic ash, and dirt leveled over 150 square miles of forest, snapping huge Douglas firs like toothpicks. The landslide debris plunged into Spirit Lake, causing a colossal water wave which washed over the adjacent mountainside over 800 feet above its pre-eruption water level. An average thickness of 300 feet of new sediment dumped into the lake has caused its surface level to be almost 250 feet higher than before the eruption. A massive number of trees felled by the blast were washed into Spirit Lake by the giant water wave. The power of catastrophically driven water to accumulate and bury extensive amounts of vegetation can easily be seen here. The floating log mat on Spirit Lake is only about half its original size because the rest of the logs have sunk to the bottom. If Mount St. Helens had erupted underwater, huge tidal waves hundreds of times larger than the Spirit Lake water wave would have caused the erupted material to be carried over much of the earth before settling. If thousands of these volcanoes were active, we can begin to imagine the destructive effects a worldwide flood would have had on the topography of the Earth's surface. This leads us to ask, could such a worldwide flood described in the Bible also be capable of explaining other geological phenomena, such as the Grand Canyon? Some geologists would have you believe that sedimentary deposits were laid down over many millions of years. What they want you to believe is just not true. The fact is, the geology of the Grand Canyon fits a model based on the occurrence of a worldwide flood. Dr. Brown's studies on the Grand Canyon provide one of the best answers.
Most people are told that the mighty Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon over millions of years. But if people could study the canyon from an aircraft, they could see its vastness and how tiny that river is in relation to the canyon itself. There is no river on earth that could carve this big hole in the ground even over billions of years. If the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon, the first question we should ask is, where did all the eroded sediments go? There should be a very large river delta at the end of the Colorado River. It's not there. Furthermore, geologists can't find a huge river delta anywhere near this part of the world. So we need to ask ourselves, where did the dirt go? At several places on this platform that overlook the Grand Canyon, there are small mountains or buttes whose horizontal layers tell a fascinating story. The layers line up with each other, so obviously they were at one time connected. Something must have come along and removed a several thousand foot thick layer of softer material that was once where we now are. So we need to explain not only where the dirt from inside the vast 200-mile long canyon went, but also where did the thousands of feet of dirt go that was once above where we are now and spread out for tens of thousands of square miles. This particular formation, called Red Butte, not only still has some of these horizontal layers, but there is another clue sitting on top. The topmost layer is a lava flow. Lava only flows downhill.
What Walt Brown is saying, and we don't have time to continue with this particular segment, what Walt Brown is saying is, yes, there should be a vast delta right there at the exit, but it isn't there. And if we go and listen to what Walt says within the context of the DVD itself, he has found evidence that indeed, at the time of the flood, there were two giant lakes, the size or even greater than the size of the Great Lakes, that came down filled with water at the end of the flood, and there, that water overflowed the smallest point of the rim of the lake and flooded the whole area and swept out the material within the flood region itself, within the Grand Canyon itself. The canyon did not exist. It simply, the water itself went to the path of least resistance and very, very, very quickly swept everything in its path. Now, in thinking about this, again, we didn't have time to include what I'm going to tell you now into the particular DVD. It turns out that here a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, about 100 geologists went to the Grand Canyon. It was published in Science News. They were there for one purpose. They had been studying the Grand Canyon. These geologists from around the country, around the world, have been studying the Grand Canyon for decades and decades. Not them, but many others for over a century. They went there to try to explain how did the Grand Canyon form on the basis of a river flowing very, very slowly and slowly eroding its way through the sediments, the sedimentary rocks, and then at the very bottom part of the Grand Canyon, the actual granite rocks themselves. So what we're saying is, if you actually see the entire DVD itself, you get a better picture of the continued evidence supporting the worldwide flood than we're having time to do right here. But as we continue now, there's something else that's quite interesting, we believe, with respect to coal. And by the way, let me say also, the pictures you just saw of basically what happened at Mount St. Helens. The pictures, of course, of the vast log mats there. David, I don't know if you want to tell the people who was in the helicopter, who was there taking the pictures, flying over the water. Who was that?
I don't want to say.
Okay, he was the one. He went and scouted out the area, got in the helicopter, told the guy where to fly, and on and on and on. He's the one that was behind the mastermind.
I can't take all that credit. I was just randomly there when they took off.
Yeah, he just sort of, flew in from outer space and fell down and got the helicopter. Anyway, a large reason why this DVD has gone so widely. It's been aired on public broadcasting, by the way, along with one of the other DVDs that we have. But anyway, it's helped a tremendous number of people to have faith in the biblical flood area of record, and also, of course, within the Bible itself. Now we're going to go to something in the Cypress Plateau Mine. Dinosaur tracks in coal. Amazing, extraordinary. How in the world did they ever get there? Obviously, in the past, there was a huge seam of vegetation in this area. Dinosaurs were walking around on top of that vegetation before it turned to coal. But how long ago was that? How old are the dinosaurs? That's what we want to know. This other dinosaur track tells the story. It's right adjacent to one of these coalified logs here in this coal mine in Price, Utah. In fact, it's only about 100 feet away from the coalified log that we saw earlier. So we know that whatever the age of the coalified wood, the dinosaurs were of the same age. In the coal mine, we saw 2 dinosaur tracks. Were those the only 2 dinosaur tracks in the coal mines here in eastern Utah? Not at all. Here in the College of Eastern Utah Prehistoric Museum, look what has been taken out of these coal mines. Look at all these dinosaur tracks, different sizes. Some flesh-eating dinosaurs, some plant-eating dinosaurs. Why were they all together? To answer that question, let's look at the Kenilworth Mine fossil map. It says there are at least 8 different track types within 100 meters on the mine's roof surface. Over here on the map itself, here we can see all the tracks and the coalified logs. According to the sign, those dinosaurs were tromping around in a swamp. Common sense tells you that can't be true. There's no swamp in the world that will preserve such tracks. All those dinosaurs were together for a reason. They were trying to escape the rising waters of a worldwide flood. These charts help illustrate how dinosaur tracks could have formed at the time of the flood and why they exist in coal today. The pre-flood earth was covered with lush vegetation, a scene of beauty everywhere. Then came the flood. Torrential rain and the fountains of the great deep bursting open caused Earth's lush vegetation to be swept up in the flood's rising waters. This vegetation accumulated in great mats and then was deposited by the ebb and flow of tidal waves produced by volcanic activity in the pre-flood seas. Each tidal action left its deposit of sediment within or over the layer of vegetation. The dinosaurs, being quite heavy, were able to survive many of the early tidal actions as they sought to escape the rising waters of the flood. When the tidal waters briefly receded, the dinosaurs continued their search for higher ground, leaving their tracks in the sediments that were freshly deposited over the vegetation. At times, their great weight caused their tracks to penetrate the sedimentary layer into the mat of vegetation. That mat of vegetation has since turned into coal, and wherever the dinosaurs left their original imprints, there we still find an indelible record of their tracks in coal today. And again, I'll say that David is the one who went out and scouted in the Cypress Plateau mine, who got someone who was very important, one of the superintendents. He told them what we wanted to do. He took David down into the mine itself, and this is why the tracks were then sprayed with white paint so we could go down and easily identify them and pictorially put them on the DVD or the video at that.
We painted those tracks in the mine.
Do what?
I said we just spray painted those tracks on the ceiling of the mine and said, look at these dinosaur tracks.
Well, we didn't do it.
No, I know. I'm just saying that
No.
The dinosaur tracks were hard to see without spray painting them, so that's why they spray painted them. But when you're there in person, you can actually see the dinosaur tracks without paint. But for the video, they did paint them.
Okay. All right, very quickly, we've got to move ahead. We've got something else coming up here.
However, under the right conditions, water can rapidly cut its way through the hardest of rocks, such as the granites at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Those conditions involve cavitation.
Cavitation is the rock pulverizing process associated with water flows greater than 100 feet per second. As water detaches from irregularities in the bedrock channel, vacuum bubbles are produced, inflicting hammer-like blows on the bedrock surface, literally converting the rocks into powder.
A modern example of rapid erosion of bedrock from cavitation comes from Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River just above the Grand Canyon. Excessive snowfall from the high country of the upper Colorado River Basin in late spring of 1983 caused excessive runoff that poured into Lake Powell at rates of up to 148,000 cubic feet per second. This rapid inflow threatened to overflow Glen Canyon Dam. To control the high flow rates, the power plant was run at full capacity, releasing 28,000 cubic feet per second through the turbines. Then the outlet tubes were opened to drain another 17,000 cubic feet per second. This was still not enough. The emergency situation required engineers to risk damage to the spillway tunnel. And on June 15, the 40-foot diameter left spillway tunnel was opened to drain an additional 13,000 cubic feet per second, which was then raised to 17,000 cubic feet per second. Then on June 28, the flow was increased to 32,000 cubic feet per second. At this point, the water exiting the tunnel became red, and noticeable ground vibrations, earthquakes, were felt by engineers. Large blocks of concrete and bedrock came hurling from the 40-foot diameter tunnel. After closing the spillway tunnel, the survey team discovered extensive cavitation damage. The 3-foot thick steel-reinforced concrete lining of the tunnel was penetrated by huge pits. At an elbow where the tunnel levels out, a hole 32 feet deep, 150 feet long, and 40 feet wide was cut through the lining into red sandstone bedrock. This hole required 63,000 cubic feet of concrete to fill. The repair process to the enormous hole shows the vast extent of the damage. The speed of erosion in the Glen Canyon Dam spillway tunnel occurred very rapidly during the period when the red color of water appeared and ground vibrations were generated. It is possible that cavitation was pulverizing concrete, steel, and sandstone at the rate of 1,000 cubic feet per second during the peak period of erosion. The destructive effects of cavitation at Glen Canyon Dam tell us the Grand Canyon could have been eroded very quickly by the sudden release of a huge volume of water above the canyon. But where did the water come from, and what caused its sudden release?
The DVD then goes to the picture there of Walt Brown, and Walt comes on and basically says that indeed after the flood there were some very large lakes that were in the upper region there of what is now the Grand Canyon, and they were basically opened up. They opened up a small cliff, a small space within the lakes themselves that began to drain, and that all that water released very, very rapidly, swept through the area which is now the Grand Canyon. And just in a period of a few weeks, the Grand Canyon itself and all the sediments were swept out at that particular time. So, many more things are relating to what we're saying, but we're coming down to the end of the
We've captured
DVD.
only a brief glimpse of the various lines of scientific evidence that point to the truth and accuracy of the biblical record of Earth's recent creation and the Great Flood. Brief though our glimpse has been, the conclusion has been certain. The radioactive traces in coalified wood collapse the geological timescale for life on Earth from hundreds of millions of years to just thousands. The occurrence of the worldwide flood explains the rapid accumulation of vegetation responsible for Earth's vast coal and oil reserves. The young age of coal and its rapid formation in the laboratory, as well as the oil now forming in Guaymas Basin off the California coast, fits only into a young, not ancient, age of the Earth. Dinosaurs, their fossils buried in mass graveyards, and their tracks in coal are a mute reminder of the futile attempts of these creatures to escape the rising waters of a worldwide flood. The excess helium in deep granites provides concrete evidence the Earth's crustal rocks are young, thus powerfully disproving the whole concept of an anciently evolving Earth. And finally, the fingerprints of creation, also found in the granites, the very rocks the Bible speaks of as Earth's foundation rocks, confirm these rocks were all the product of the same creation. This fact invalidates evolution's basic assumption of uniform radioactive decay and collapses the whole structure of evolutionary time. We must conclude, therefore, that evolution's 4.5 billion year age of the Earth is nothing more than science fiction. Prior to viewing this evidence, perhaps few would have believed that the granite monoliths of Yosemite were part of Earth's creation about 6,000 years ago. This is somewhat understandable, seeing that we live in a secular world dominated by the belief that science supports the evolutionary view of an ancient Earth. But now that this evidence for creation and a young Earth has exposed evolution's fundamental flaw, we realize there has always been a bridge connecting science with biblical creation. Why didn't we recognize it sooner? It seems we were blinded by the idea we could explain all of Earth history by the natural laws that we now experience. We forgot that God's infinite creative power is far above our limited understanding of the universe and the laws which govern it. So things that fitted into evolution were emphasized, so much so that it seemed natural law really did explain everything. The hard things that couldn't be explained were put on the back burner. We tended to forget them, thinking they would someday be solved. What we failed to admit to ourselves is that many of those hard things were really impossible to explain within the framework of evolution, that they were actually evidence for either creation or a worldwide flood. The evidence presented has given us reason to rethink our beliefs about origins based on valid scientific data. Clearly, the belief system that fits all the scientific facts we presented is the record of creation given in Genesis and repeated by Moses in Exodus 20:11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day.
And that's where we are today. The evidence we presented did exactly what Lonnie said. It's been a great privilege to be with you today. Great privilege for my son David to be with me today as we do this together, going out to the world to help who knows how many people turn to the Bible and turn to the Savior, the author of the Bible. Thank you again for the opportunity of being with you today, David and myself.
To order this fascinating video, call now 1-800-467-6380. That's 1-800-467-6380. Or visit the website at www.halos.com to order by check or credit card. Again, that's www.halos.com.